Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to economics. Um, Good to see so many of you in attendance. That is such a corny joke, isn't it? But I thought you might enjoy it. Not sure what's going on, but we're at least past midterms and probably approaching kind of the home stretch of the semester. So for you guys, I thought that maybe it might be a good way to start things off. Anyway, today's going to be a fun day because we're going to talk about economic history. The fiscal policy stuff that we've talked about and gone over, now we are actually going to put that stuff to work. We're going to see how was it used in our economic history, what were the results, why did we change it, and just some more applications thing. But it's really cool because all these things that you've been learning, now you'll get to actually see how they were put into practice. Were they successful? Were they not? And, plot twist, spoiler alert, there's some of each in there. So I think you'll really like it, and let's get down to business then. Okay, let's go to the whiteboard. Alrighty, so if you are keeping up with this, your notes, let's title this Economic History. So this section is Economic History. And we're just going to start with the beginning, and we're going to hit the high points because back in the days of the quarter system, you would do an entire quarter on economic history, but we're just going to hit the high points, which is mostly what you need unless you're going to major in economics. Then you'll get into it more in depth. But before 1930, before the Great Depression, we didn't have a lot of stuff to keep up with. I mean, it wasn't as easy to record data as it is now, and certainly some of the data might be flawed or otherwise misrepresented. So, mostly it was a hands-off type era. And the economists for this era were called classical economists. And classical economists, these folks, they believed in laissez-faire, which is, for those of you, I think we've been over it, but just in case, no fiscal policy. Now, I think that the loose translation is hands-off. In this case, of course, it applies to government hands-off of business, of the economy. Okay, so that's what they're doing. So they believed in no fiscal policy, let the natural market forces correct any problems. So no fiscal policy and let the markets correct. Now this one's kind of a neat thing to say. They also believed governments should live within their means. That one's kind of fun to think about, isn't it? Because certainly that is something that is unheard of. I don't even know if it's possible today, considering all the debt and the budget and everything we've got going on with our government. But the classical economists believe that, hey, they should live like ordinary folks should live. You should have more coming in than you got going out. So that's where they believe. Now that school of thought is around today, and they're called neoclassical economists. I'm not writing that down because I'm not testing you on it, but just in case you hear that term used, these are the folks it's referring to, the ones that just think everything should be hands-off. Okay, so then that was rocking along fine and we would have a few hiccups. I mean, business cycles still existed back then. So you would have your share of, we had our share of recessions and things like that, but typically nothing that would cause too much, nothing that we could not overcome until the Great Depression. So the Great Depression, what we had there, and I'm just going to talk to y'all for a little bit about this, okay, until we get back to that. We get back to note taking, but I'm going to kind of set the stage because we talked about World War II and the Great Depression in previous lectures, so there's no need to write all that down. And again, I'm not testing you on it, but I want you to know because it sets the stage for what's to come. But World War II, we had 4 years of contraction. So we have 4 years of a contracting economy. That's a lot. During that time, of course, we had rising unemployment. People were out of work. People were hungry. People lost their homes and their livelihoods, their businesses. So everybody, and after 4 years of this, people were fed up. They were fed up. They were getting sick of it. They were very impatient. They believed, hey, these natural market forces, where are they? We don't see the natural market forces. They're not helping us out any. So in that case, I don't think the economy can heal itself. So with that in mind, we were having vast unemployed resources, and our GDP was very far below our potential. So you remember the long run aggregate supply model where we had the potential and then the GDP. Do something. So the government was saying, okay, hands off is great, but right now it seems like the market forces have decided to take a sabbatical, so we need something else. So entered the era of demand side economics. So we went over John Maynard Keynes before, so we went over Keynes. So this this is when it came about, the Keynesian era of demand side economics, and this was after sorry, type wrong, sorry, Great Depression. So this started after the Great Depression. All right, so the demand side economics, so what they were doing is changing aggregate demand to promote full employment. All right, so that's what was going on. Now, that didn't, it worked somewhat. I mean, they had some success. It did provide some relief. To be honest, the 1930s were just, there was no relief in sight. So if you want to know what did cause us some relief, and this kind of bleeds into the conspiracy theories that you might hear from your history professors and such, about did Roosevelt know about Pearl Harbor and allow us to get into World War II? Did they want us to get into World War II? But it's kind of interesting. So I'm going to shut down the whiteboard so that I can talk to y'all full screen now. So it was kind of interesting because World War II, at that time, think about it, it was happening overseas. It was not happening here in America. So we still had our factors of production. We still had factories. We still had employees. We still had natural resources. We had all the things we needed to produce. On the other hand, in Europe, their factories were getting bombed. They needed everybody had to fight, even citizens. You had to defend your area, or you had to retreat from your area. You never knew when the fighting was going to come to you. You didn't know what to do. It was a vast uncertainty there. So what happened is they needed, but they still needed goods and services. They still needed food. They still needed guns. They still needed bullets, all those things that they needed to fight a war and to survive. So what happened is we had all that stuff available. We were in the middle. We had vast unemployed resources. Hey, looks like a match made in heaven, right? And it was. So prosperity returned to the United States because we started producing everything that they could not. Everything that they could not. Everything that they didn't have the resources to produce, we produced it. And it brought a lot of prosperity into us. Now, at the same time, we were looking and saying, okay, it is not good for us if Hitler wins. We don't want that to happen. This is, we're going to have to, if he wins over and even if we were completely selfish and saying, hey, that's Europe's problem, if he wins over there, that's going to affect us in negative ways too. So yes, we did get into the war. And of course, from your history professors what was happening with that. So we did get into that war, and that definitely helped us out in terms of our finances, our economy. So we entered an era of prosperity. Now, after the war, what happened then was that Europe was still rebuilding. So it's not like after the war, they just immediately went back and started producing all their stuff. They could not do that. They had to rebuild, and they didn't have the resources for that. They didn't have the money for that. They put all their resources and money into fighting this war. So the United States was still in a position where we could continue to produce, continue to pick up the slack, make up the slack, and things like that. So that's what we were doing. And this worked fine for us until, and now we'll go back to the whiteboard. This worked fine for us until round about the 1960s. So around about the 1960s, and what happened then, Europe was rebuilt. Europe got rebuilt. They were producing for themselves. They didn't need us as much anymore, so things were starting to slow down here in terms of production. When that happens, we talked about it enough for you to know that unemployment's going to rise a little bit and we might be heading towards a recession. JFK did not want that to happen because, and if we're given the benefit, let's assume that he's looking out for the best interest of the country. He doesn't want it to happen because it's bad for the country. The country doesn't want to go through a recession. We don't want to go back. Memories were still fresh about what we just gone through. Another reason, if we were to assume he's being self-focused, and there's probably a lot of that involved, if we were to assume that, then probably what happens is he's going to want to get reelected and he doesn't want his term marred by a huge recession. Can't blame him there. So either way, that is the last thing he wants to have happen. So what he did, he was the first president to propose a deliberate deficit to stimulate the economy. So he said, all right, let's do some spending. Let's do some things. Let's engage in some expansionary. Let's be proactive and engage in this expansionary fiscal policy before the recession hits. Not a bad way of thinking. However, he was told, okay, that's going to throw us into deficit. Well, he felt like it was the right thing to do, so that's what was happening. And it did stave off a recession for a while. So it did do that, proposed a deliberate deficit. Now, how could he get away with this? This came into an era of what I call Keynesians gone wild. So they were kind of tinkering with the economy, and they had some success with it. And this is this is something that's very important. JFK, if we know anything about him, we know he was young, he was good looking. His time in office was called Camelot. It's supposed to be idyllic and perfect. So people liked him. He was an excellent communicator. He was just this great communicator. So when he communicated, he inspired consumer confidence. So JFK had some success due to his ability to inspire. I'm going to capitalize this so we'll see how important it is. Consumer confidence. It's extremely important. So if anything, if nothing, as consumers from this class, you will get how important you are. So he inspired consumer confidence. When consumer confidence is inspired, people spend more. So this leads to more consumption. Okay, so he inspired this consumer confidence, led to more consumption. This happened because during that time, we'll get to that. I'm getting ahead of myself there. All right, so then JFK was assassinated. That terrible thing happened, and so in 1964, Lyndon Johnson, or LBJ, became president. Now, LBJ, he was his vice president under Kennedy, but he had a vastly different idea in mind. So what he wanted to do, he wanted to legislate a great society. So he thought, okay, all the problems in the United States, rather, maybe not the world, but probably the world too. All the problems in the United States, our economic difficulties and economic, social costs, all that stuff, it can be solved by legislation, by government involvement. So he said, okay, we're going to enact all these programs that are going to stop poverty and rebuild the urban United States. So he wanted to stop poverty and rebuild the urban United States. I mean, it depends. Maybe he was building a legacy. Maybe he actually wanted to help people. Maybe he was just flat out nuts. There's a lot of evidence to say he was flat out nuts, truthfully. But, stopping poverty is a noble goal, and so we're going to treat it as such. It was a noble goal, even with nobility, but it did not work. Now, he was able to get these programs enacted because at the time, 76% of the citizens of the U.S. citizens trusted the government was looking out for their best interest. And when the government did something, we have faith in them that they're helping us out. 76%. You want to know what it's like today? Today, the number is more like 19%. And I think it's dropped even more. The last time I checked, that was a while back, a year or so ago. So it's probably less now. But we'll go with 19%. Those numbers are still very telling. So at 19%, so the legacy of all this government interference is we no longer believe the government has our best interest at heart. But he did enact a lot of programs, more than Franklin Roosevelt. Now, Franklin Roosevelt gets credit for a lot of programs that Johnson actually enacted. So, maybe, I don't know. So I guess there's a lot of economic history that's not entirely reported accurately, I suppose, or at least, the urban legend goes on and it goes from there. Okay, so what that led us to, so he enacted a lot of programs, and we came along to the 1970s. The 1970s, that's when we saw something else. We had something else that was unusual and we'd never seen before. Now, if you're noticing a pattern, and you'll see it as we finish out this, if you notice a pattern, you will see that we don't do well with change, do we? We like to be comfortable and familiar in things that we know. We don't like a lot of things that we don't know what's going on. So in the 1970s, we had something else, and we discussed it in class briefly. We'll look at it again. Stagflation reared its ugly head. So what happened there? We had, so with stagflation, remember, GDP decreases, unemployment increases, and inflation increases. And I'm going to note on there that it's hyperinflation. So hyperinflation means it's a lot of inflation. So that's what's going on. That's what's going on there. Okay. So looking to see, I'm going to need some more room because we're going to go to a graph now. Yay! I know you're all so excited for this graph, but this is cool. This will show you exactly what's going on there. All right. So stagflation. Let's draw our, shoot. Started out wrong, didn't I? Okay, there we go. Let's go a little bit, give myself more room. All right, here we go. So we have GDP, price level. Use my purple to put, here's our potential. So there's our GDP star. That's our goal. That's the target that we want to hit with GDP. So what we have going on, all right, so we have short run aggregate supply, and we have an aggregate demand. Okay, close enough. So there we are. All right, and there's our first price level. Okay, so what's going on that time? We have some things called, or we have something on in the rest of the world that affects us. We have a couple of things there. Now, we're becoming more of a global economy. After World War II, we became much more of a global economy. Other countries started relying on us when they couldn't get goods from Europe. In addition to supplying Europe, we also supplied other countries. They were relying on us. Then what happened in the 70s, there were world crop failures. Okay, so world crop failures were happening. So when this, the world crop failures were going on, and even if we didn't buy our food supplies from these other countries that were having these failures, what we did have happen was that they didn't have the money to trade with us anymore. So that would lower our GDP, and we would be forced to lower our production. So what you're going to see is a decrease in our short-run aggregate supply. We'll do that in just a second. So we had world crop failures, and also the OPEC oil. How did I? And I'm going to put it was the OPEC oil shortage. Now, OPEC is a group of companies, of oil producers in the Middle East, and we bought the majority of our oil from them. Still do, although we have increased our domestic production in the decades after the 70s. And we did that mainly so that we would not be dependent on them. But we were highly dependent on them. They decided to restrict oil that they would send to us to drive the price up. Now, you know that when supply shifts to the left, when the supply curve shifts to the left, that's going to cause the price of an item to go up. What happened in that case, we needed the oil not just to get to work, to put in our cars and get to work. We also needed oil to run the equipment. We needed gas to run equipment. So production, we couldn't produce if we didn't have oil and gas to run that equipment. We also needed oil and gas to fill vehicles to get the goods to market. You know, you're in a situation, even if you could produce, you can't get your goods to market. Your customers can't get to you because they don't have any gas. So what do you do by that point? So with that in mind, you can't produce if you're just going to have the goods sitting there. So short run aggregate supply took a huge hit in that case. And I meant to use a different color, but y'all will survive, I guess, with that. I meant to use a different color for this one, but anyway, we'll just do it like that. Here, we'll do a little bit of a different color. So short run aggregate supply, there. It's going to be more confusing, isn't it? All right, just bear with me on that one. So short run aggregate supply, and there we go, and price level 2. So look, price level was going up, wasn't it? Look at what else was happening. There we go. Booyah, stagflation. Boom, baby, we got stagflation. So what happened there? So this all caused short run aggregate supply 1 decrease to short run aggregate supply 2 shifted left. And then this caused stagflation. All right. Now, keep in mind during this time, caused the stagflation, we are Keynesians, okay? So keep in mind, we are Keynesians at this point in our economy. So all we'll do, we focus on aggregate demand here. So all we've got are taxes and government spending. Those are our only options right here. Okay, so let's look. At this point, fiscal policy won't work. Now let's see why. Fiscal policy won't work because we have, all right, fiscal policy won't work because we have, so if we're going to target, so let's target something. And so if we want to increase GDP, okay, so we want to increase GDP, so what can we do? Well, we can do things to shift aggregate demand to the right. So if we shift aggregate demand to the right, then let's see what happens. All right, so I'm going to come up here. Let me pick me a different color. I'll do yellow for that one. All right, so if we shift it to the right, aggregate demand, then, yeah, that's going to increase GDP. Yes, we'll see that happen, but look what else is going to happen. So we're shifting it to the right. So yes, GDP is going to increase, do that. But look right here at prices. They're going to go up even more. That's going to cause a problem, isn't it? That is definitely going to cause a problem right there. So if we have, so if aggregate demand shift to the right, then price level also goes up. So that's a problem. All right, so we want to decrease price level. Okay, let's focus on that. So if we decrease price level, then we're going to have aggregate. To decrease price level, we've got to decrease aggregate demand. We've got to shift it left. But let's see what happens there. So let's go up. We'll go back to yellow for that one. So yellow, so we're going to shift it left. Here we go. We're going to shift. Okay, so yes, that's going to drive down prices. Let's get back to our aggregate demand. Our aggregate supply. Okay, yeah, right there. So you see that is going to drive down the prices, maybe a little bit, but depending on how much the shift. But look what else. So we're driving down the prices, but we're also decreasing GDP. So that, my friends, is not going to work in it. So aggregate demand shifts left, but we have a falling GDP. So none of our fiscal policy issues are going to work, are they? Not a single one. We can't do that. In either way we shift aggregate demand, we're going to be in worse shape. So let's see. We're going to draw a clean graph for you. Price level. Let's put in our, see, sorry, this tablet I use makes me draw crooked, but I think you'll still be able to get it. All right, so we have our short run aggregate supply is way over here. We have our aggregate demand, and here we are, price level and GDP. All right, and we want to get to right here. All right, so what we're going to do instead, all right, so then, okay, I'm going to switch back to text for this one so I can type it. So then what happened, we were hitting the late 70s, and we'd had all these terrible recessions, and fiscal policy wasn't working. Ford couldn't fix it. Nixon couldn't fix it. So enter, dun, da, 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 Ronald Reagan, elected in 1980. So Ronald Reagan, and he had a different idea. Ronald Reagan, he had a different idea on what to do. Waiting for the big reveal. All right, Reagan, he had something called Reaganomics. That was his plan. It was called that because he came up to it. What it really is supply side economics. So what Reagan is saying is, hey, our problem in the beginning was not aggregate demand. Our problem is this guy right here. So let's do some things that will increase aggregate supply. All right, so what supply side economics does, focuses on shifting short-run aggregate supply through tax cuts and business incentives. So that's what they're going to do. Let's cut taxes and have some business incentives and see what happens. So he instigated a 23% tax cut across the board. This gave some relief to businesses. They had, all of a sudden, they had 3% more of their profits that they could start producing more with, and they did. The oil crisis was lifted because Reagan had a very strong military stance, and when he came in, he said, we're going to bomb your butts if you don't play nice, act right and play nice. Also, to be fair, OPEC at that point was realizing that, hey, you can't just send your major customer into a depression, not depression, sorry, I misused that term myself, into this major recession. You can't just devastate your major customer, their economy, and then expect to prosper yourself. So they learned a little something in that too. Either way, these 23% tax cuts, they gave some relief to consumers and households, they gave some relief to businesses, and production started amping up. So what we had going on at that point, let's see, so we had, let's see, I'm going to go with green. So short run aggregate supply started, it's a 1 right there. So what's going on there? Look, that's solving the problem. So we're really all he's doing, and it's brilliant because people were just scrambling around. I remember those days, people were scrambling around, but what he's doing is he said, hey, this is what caused it. Let's go back to the root of the problem and fix the root of the problem. And that's what he did. So you've got right here, see, so you've got decreasing prices, increasing GDP, you know, it's starting to get better. Okay, so what we had going on was, so we had with these tax cuts, so we had consumption increase, investment increase, and thus GDP increase. So think of your circular flow model. That is a chicken scratch, but if you write it down now, you'll know what I meant. Circular flow model. Okay. And here's a funny thing too, because people are saying, oh my gosh, the government's not going to be able to stay in business because of the falling tax revenues. But if you look, tax revenue went up because you have more people working. So tax revenue went up due to the expanding economy. All right, so due to the expanding economy, tax revenue went up. All right, so the only problem that did hit us on this is that as per our usual, you will have, when these things are going up, you're going to have aggregate demand shift up. And, as that happens, then you end up having us go in and cause an expansionary gap. So you see there, so as that happens, these things, they don't act just unilaterally. It's not like that. So then we have that. So, but that's typical business cycles. So the supply side, I think it was a great idea. Obviously it worked at the time, and that's what happened with the economy. That's the point where I say any questions, and I still find myself wanting to say any questions. But as always, if you have questions on this, please do email me those. And if there's something, I'll answer yours. And if there's something the rest of the class should know, we could do a small recorded session to answer these questions. So please, if you want to have an Ask Professor Hambrick session, by all means, send your questions in and we'll cover that. Okay, so that is what was going on there. So here's a sadder story. We have, all right, so with that expansionary gap, to close that gap will need to be closed. Otherwise, we'll do the thing that we talked about, and so it needed to be closed. So 1988, we were heading towards a recession, and George H.W. Bush was elected, and that was the father. And he was elected, and he knew that we had to close it. Had to close expansionary gap with contractionary policy. So he had to close expansionary gap with contractionary policy, which means raise taxes. EGATS. He was going to have to raise taxes. Okay. Well, that's not the most popular thing for a politician to do, is it? Especially after you're coming off an administration that was about lowering taxes. So now he had to raise taxes. So he did it, and it worked, and it kept us from having a huge bad recession, but it cost him re-election. So he did not get reelected. So I said he's kind of an unsung hero there because he did what needed to be done, but it cost an election. So if you look back and say, okay, why don't everybody always says this, including me. They'll say, why don't the politicians do what's best for the country? Why are they always so concerned? Well, that's why, because they don't get elected. That's a flaw in our system. we still overall, it's still a net positive, the system we have, but that is a flaw because that flaw could be with people not knowing the things. Now you guys know. So you'll know the economy and you can take a better, more objective issue to it. That's why I love economists. Economists really, most of my economist friends are neither Republican nor Democrat. We're all nonpartisan. We all look at the numbers and the facts. And I love that because that way, there's not a lot of rhetoric that can distract from the real issues. But that was a sidebar. Let's go on. And then we had the 1990s and Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton was smart enough to know what he didn't know. He was smart enough to leave the policies in place, and if it's not broke, don't fix it. Something you may not know is that Bill Clinton had a lot of the Reagan-Bush economic advisors on his cabinet team. So just a little bit of trivia for you. Then Bill Clinton serves his time, and we come to 2001 with George W. Bush, the son, the younger one. And George W. Bush, he started to follow, he was facing similar conditions to Reagan because the recession was coming about because of business cycles. He was facing similar conditions. And so there's a lot of strong technology development too during Bill Clinton's era. So we were dealing with that. That was expanding the economy rapidly, very rapidly. So George W. Bush, he was doing some tax cuts and stimulus, tax cuts and stimulus to hold off a recession. But there was something that happened there, something that happened during his era at the beginning right there that hindered the recovery, and that was 9/11. So when September 11th happened, the terrorist attacks, if you can think about it, remember the whole country, or maybe you don't remember because a lot of you were little kids then, but the country did not know what to do. It was something we had never seen before. It was something we'd never experienced before. We weren't sure. And as I've been saying, we don't like surprises here, especially in our economy. So it hindered recovery. Businesses were scaling back because all we knew at the time was that more was coming. This was bad, more was coming, didn't know what to do. This hindered the recovery there. It hindered our recovery, and everything he tried. Stock market plummeted, unemployment went up, so the stock market decreased, unemployment increased, and it was bad conditions and things that he tried. It took a long time for our recovery for that one. Consumer confidence. Another thing that happened, and this is something, we were talking about consumer confidence with JFK. Ronald Reagan had a lot of consumer confidence, by the way. So go back and note that in your notes. Ronald Reagan had a lot of consumer confidence, and that helped. He was a great communicator. Bill Clinton was a great communicator. All these good communicators, they can inspire confidence in the citizens. And when you're confident, you're going to spend. You got to spend to keep us out of a recession. So that was helping. George W. Bush, because of 9/11, I mean, he may have inspired more confidence given time. Because of 9/11, we had consumer confidence decreased. Okay, so we didn't know. And it wasn't necessarily we weren't confident in the economy or the government or the businesses or whatever. We weren't confident in the world, in what was going on. We had no idea. This was a whole new situation for us. And we're still reeling from that today. So that, and it's just gotten different. We're not quite numb to it even yet, I wouldn't think. But consumer confidence decreased, and therefore the economy was not able to recover as well. So in steps Barack Obama, who was another really great communicator. So Obama came in. He was another really great communicator. Now, the problems he faced were the same things we were talking about with the Great Recession, the housing market problem. So we said, we already talked about that, so we won't reinvent the wheel, but we had problems in the housing market resulting in Financial market panic. All right, so we had panic in the financial markets. When that happened, banks quit lending. So when banks quit lending, then when banks quit lending, you know that we had decreases in investment, consumption, aggregate demand, and thus GDP, leading to the Great Recession. So that just kind of refreshes your memory in a nutshell as to what was going on there. So Obama is a Keynesian. So he enacted a stimulus, let's see, he enacted an 800 billion stimulus package. And it tripled the federal deficit. Folks did start to spend again as soon as they could. We saw that there were a lot of things going on. There were a lot of things going on in the economy that the stimulus just could not overcome. Plus, this stimulus was spent more in transfer payments, bailouts, things like that, as opposed to building infrastructure, education, things that would actually help to increase. It's like if you borrow money on your student loan debt, then that, borrowing is something we want to try to avoid. But at least if you're borrowing on a student loan debt, you're borrowing in the thoughts that in the future, what you'll be able to do is you'll get a better job. You'll be more employable. You're investing in yourself. If we build roads and improve airports and different things like that, then we're investing in the country. If we just give money to people, that's not really an investment in the country. That would kind of be like if you borrowed to pay for your groceries or your steak dinner. You might say, well, yeah, groceries are an investment, but if you're borrowing to take yourself out for a steak dinner, it's not the same thing. It doesn't produce any goods and services. And for a stimulus to actually work, it has to do things that will lead to greater production. And that was what was wrong with the stimulus package. It just wasn't doing that. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit more about something, or I'm going to introduce a theory to you that came from the Yale School of Economics, the Yale Business School, and it's a theory called political business cycles. Now we talked about business cycles, so you know what those are. It's that excuse me, the economy has ups and downs, and it has expansions and contractions, and that things go that way. And we've seen some economic history to prove that that does indeed happen. The numbers back up that theory. So political business cycles just introduces another thought. Political business cycles, this theory tells us that politicians have used expansionary fiscal policy to get elected, but leave an expansionary gap requiring more fiscal policy. So there's an expansionary gap requiring more fiscal policy. Now the fiscal policy, remember George H.W. Bush, the fiscal policy required to close an expansionary gap is not going to get you reelected. Therefore, no one's going to want to do it. So what's going to happen is we will just have an even bigger recession because of this. So they're saying, so what Yale is saying, this study says, is that business cycles go along with presidential election cycles and congressional elections. And if you'll look back at the history, especially in modern times, that's kind of exactly what we were seeing, wasn't it? These recessions would hit when it was about time for, the 8 years was past. So this is their theory. There's a lot of truth to it. Now let's look at some other problems with fiscal policy. So there's some other problems indeed. First problem, this is a problem all across the board in economics, is called lag time. And lag time, this is the time between policy implementation and results. Sorry about that. I was trying to remember my spelling. Time between policy implementation and results. So it's just like when you start taking medicine for something. You're sick or you have an ache and a pain and you take some Advil for it, or you take some Tylenol for a fever or something like that. It's not going to immediately work like that. You're going to have to wait on the medicine to take effect. Why do they tell you, if the doctor gives you antibiotics, it says, please finish the whole bottle even if you feel better? It's because of the lag time. It's going to take some time, and then they'll say you'll start to feel better in a day or two. That's why. So it's the same thing with the economy. You implement a policy, and it's going to take a minute for it to take effect. Okay. The other one, the theory called the permanent income theory, and this one's kind of funny to me. It deals with behavioral economics. It's that people view changes as temporary and therefore do not adjust their habits. So in other words, if you're getting a tax rebate, you say that's temporary. It's not, I'm not going to adjust my habits based on this because this is going to go away. Yeah, we're getting this good thing right now, but it might go away. So I'm not going to adjust habits. So in other words, it's not going to work. Anything you're trying to get out of us is not going to work. They're saying we're too smart for you. That's what this theory is saying. And then finally, the last one, offsetting effects. This one is another favorite of mine because what it tells us is changes that positively affect one group are offset by negative effects on another. So you have a policy, and that policy positively affects one group, but then it negatively impacts another. That's true because a lot of these programs are accompanied by extra taxes, raises in taxes, which do not benefit another. So for example, I've got two for you. Number one is unemployment. If you raise unemployment benefits, that has to come with a raise in the unemployment tax for the employer. So that's not going to help. That's going to be a problem. Another is the minimum wage. You raise the minimum wage, that will benefit the people who are being paid that money. However, it will negatively impact the employer, and it's going to cut down, the employer is going to have to cut down on hours, and it's going to have to cut down on new hires. So there's some offsetting effects right there. And that's a problem. That's a problem that comes back with fiscal policy. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about federal budget. Okay, so the federal budget is the same as any other household budget, only on steroids, and that is you have some money coming in and you have money going out. So what's coming in, tax revenue is coming in, and then what's going out, you have your government purchases plus transfer payments. So you have tax revenue is coming in, and then government purchases if they buy, equipment or whatnot, or infrastructure, all those things, and then transfer payments, that is your public assistance, welfare, unemployment, things of that nature. So that's what's coming in. Our budget is not balanced. Definitely we have more going out than coming in. Here's how it works. So we have the president submits the budget proposal to Congress. So it starts in the president's office, and then Congress reworks, and that's called budget resolution. So Congress reworks and then sends it back to the president, and then the president, this whole thing right here, so then the president looks at it and says, nope, can't live with what you said, and then he sends it, or she, would send it back to Congress, and the whole thing starts all over again. So that's how the budget works right now. Now you can see, the question on your mind is the same one on everybody's mind. Well, then wait, what's going on here? That's how does anything get done? Well, it doesn't. So what we do now, we operate on a system of continuing resolutions. And what this means, we are allowed spending at the rate of the previous year, since budgets are rarely approved anymore. I would say they're never approved anymore, but we'll put rarely. And so we can spend at the rate of the previous year. Obviously cost of so what they do then is when you hear them talk about we've got to vote on raising the debt ceiling, since we're operating at a deficit anyway, we're spending more than we've got coming in, everything is financed, so we just raise the debt rate. Kind of like if you're spending on credit cards, if you're paying your daily expenses with credit cards and then you end up you run out of space, so you have to get a different, you get a different card. Somebody sends you a new credit card and you go from there. All right, so there are, and of course there are problems there, lag times, politics, things of that nature that would be a problem with this system. But there are 3 budget philosophies. Number 1 is annually balanced budget. We haven't had this since before the Great Depression. No definition really necessary, is it? Because you know what that is. It's a balanced budget. You have what's going out balanced with what's coming in. We don't have that. Okay, so, and it is funny too, if you want to notice, before the Great Depression, after the Great Depression was when all the government involvement started. So since these fiscal policies got in place, we've not been able to balance the budget. Interesting to think. Okay, this is more of the JFK idea, is a cyclically balanced budget. And I'm going to write the definition before I post it here. And this is when you run a deficit during recessions offset by a surplus during expansions. I can live with this one. I mean, obviously I prefer the annually balanced. I think we've gone a little far for that now, but the cyclically balanced isn't bad, because at least it's just like if a construction company, they may operate in the red. They may not, in some places, they may not have a lot of money coming in the winter if it's too cold for them to do their work. So they save money to get them through the winter, stay in business, and pay the bills. However, sometimes that money runs out. If it does, they may borrow a little bit. But they borrow knowing that, hey, I'm going to pay this back as soon as my season picks up and I start building again. So that's different. But the thing with cyclically balanced is it has to be planned for and it has to be executed properly. And you have to make sure that you're going to pay that back. Otherwise, it will lead to, otherwise it would just lead to more problems. Hang on, I'm typing this one for you. Okay, so right here, this is what we have now. This is called a functional finance. Some of us like to call it a dysfunctional finance. So what this one does, you're focusing on balance. It's kind of, you just giving up. You say, okay, balancing the budget is impossible. Can't do it. Not going to happen. So instead, let's focus on something we can do, which is target potential GDP. Now that may seem reasonable to someone outside of this classroom sitting in it. I'm hoping that it might seem a little unreasonable to you guys not to just give up about balancing the budget. Because once you give up, that's it. It's only going to get harder to do. But targeting potential GDP. Said instead, let's just hit our target potential and just keep things rolling along. I like to call it a Dr. Phil moment. How's that working for you? Well, we're complaining, we're we've got some instability here, maybe not working so good. Maybe at the very least we should go back to the cyclically balanced, even if we can't do the annual balanced at this point. And hey, who knows? Let's take baby steps toward improvement and see what happens. But this is our budget philosophies right now. That's what we're looking at. All right, so I've got one more little section that I'm going to do because it goes with this. I realize this is a longer lecture than normal, but these things go together, and I would like to wrap them up because then you can have your exam next week, and at that point we'll do money and banking and international, and you'll be done. We'll be done. You'll know everything you need to know about macro to exist in the world until you want to go on and study more. So that's not a bad thought, is it? All right. So let's go back to, we're going to wrap up talking about our national debt. Okay, so this is kind of a depressing one. So we'll leave you on a depressed note. I'm sorry about that, but sometimes not everything is flowers and candy, is it? Okay, so national debt. So to finance deficits, and your own household budget. If you owe money, you've got to come up with that money somewhere. So to finance these deficits, the U.S. Treasury sells bonds, which are really just government IOUs. So they sell bonds. A bond is a government IOU. It's the same thing. If you have a corporate bond, all you're doing, you're loaning money to that corporation, and a bond is just the way that debt is structured. Okay, so that's what it is. So the treasury bonds, savings bonds, T-bills, all that stuff, that's government IOUs. All right, and these must have higher interest rates. I abbreviate that with a lowercase I, so I'm going to write that on there for you. Highest interest rates to get people to buy them. So higher than what? Higher than their other investments. So they have to have higher interest rates to get people to buy them, to make them a good investment. All right, so we're just going to do these in a series right here. Okay, so they are sold to U.S. citizens and foreigners. Foreign governments, foreign citizens, foreign businesses, stuff like that. So they're sold to U.S. citizens and foreigners. Okay. They cause, since they have higher interest rates to get people to buy them, they cause competition, or well, they are rather, competition in the money market. Their competition in the money market, which is driving up interest rates. So they cause competition in the money market. Now the banks don't want you to buy the government bonds. They don't get money. They can't operate out of that. So they want you to buy their instruments. So you've got competition in the money market driving up interest rates. This is called crowding out. So it's crowding out investment is really what that's called, crowding out investment. So what you will have with that, you will have consumption decrease, investment decrease, and then of course the risk for GDP to decrease as well. So you have decreases in that if competition in the money market. Now we're going to talk more about that in the money and banking section, which is coming up after your exam. So just bear with me if that doesn't make complete and total sense to you right now. If any questions on your exam will just be definitional. So you should be able to handle them without us going into it in depth just yet. Okay, so as foreigners buy the T-bonds, exchange their currency for US dollars. Okay, so foreign currency, they're taking their euros, they're exchanging them for US dollars, using the US dollars to buy the bond. Okay, so what that does, it causes the demand for dollars increases, causing the value of the dollar to increase. Okay, now that does not sound like a bad thing. I hesitate to bring this up here, but yet it's one of those things that's not going to make a ton of sense to you until we go over it in the exchange rate stuff with the international. But when it causes the value of the dollars to increase, one effect, and you can take my word for it now, and I'll show you how later. And again, I'll be asked any question that you can't answer from what we're going over right here, but it makes imports cheaper, so they increase, and exports more expensive, so they decrease. So when you have imports increasing and exports decreasing, what that leads to is a higher trade deficit. Okay, and you know that that's also bad for GDP. Right. And then finally, the last thing to tell you about that, well, also we got two things to tell you about that. The last thing is, another problem is that the U.S. economy is in part controlled by foreign influences. So foreign influences have 46% of our national debt. So almost half, right at half, is controlled by foreign influences, mostly China and Japan. We used to be the largest creditor, and now we are the largest debtor in the world. So we used to be the largest creditor, now we are the largest debtor. Here's some problems. So the U.S. economy, we can't make decisions without thinking about that national debt. So let's think about it. Suppose I have a student there named Sally Mae. So Sally Mae is my student, and I forgot my lunch money one day, and I'm hungry, and Sally Mae says, "Oh, here, Miss Hambrick, I'll loan you some money for lunch." So she loans me some money for lunch, and I said, "Thank you," and all this. Let's skip with lunch money. Let's say that I'm $100 short paying my bill. Sally Mae hears about it. She says, "You know what? Here's $100. Go ahead and pay your bill." So I borrowed $100 from Sally Mae. So I have an exam. Sally Mae doesn't do so well. So she comes up. She's not prepared. So Sally Mae comes up to hand in her Scantron to me, and she says, "Here's my Scantron, Miss Hambrick. I'm having some issues with that. I hope I did well. So I hope that when you grade this, you'll see I did well. And by the way, take your time paying back that $100. I don't need it right away. You can take your time about that. I don't want you to be in trouble." So what do you think's going on there, huh? I get the subtleties of that. So that is what's happening with our economy. We cannot make decisions solely based on what's good for our economy. We have to consider these people that we owe money to. And another large part of our economy, of our national debt, is also owned by the Saudis, the oil people. So that is an issue, especially considering how dependent we are on oil and gas. So this is just some things that in terms of national security and our decision making, it kind of hinders us that way. So one question then that people always ask, including me before I took economics, is why don't we just print some more money? Let's just print up some dollars and pay off our debt and call it a day. Let's just print up as much dollars as we need. Well, here's why. It's a demand and supply issue. So let's say, let's do it this way. Why can't just print more money to pay off debt? Why we can't just print more money to pay off debt? It's a demand and supply issue. All right, so if you've got the supply of dollars, so if you got the supply of dollars increasing, Then you have the value of dollars, or, well, it's the price of dollars, but we're going to say value of dollars decreasing. Then it takes more dollars to pay off our debt. So you got the supply increasing. I'm going to draw you a quick and dirty supply curve for that. All right, so you've got, so this is supply and demand of dollars. There's your demand. Supply is actually going to be different, but let's look at, yeah, supply is going to look like this. So you're getting a preview. So that's the demand for dollars, and that's the supply of dollars. So you're getting a preview of what money market's going to look like. This particular graph isn't on the test, it's just for illustration. So if you have the supply of dollars increasing, so supply is different, so it's S1 dollar to S2 dollar, then you're going to see the price, you are going to have a price over here, decreasing. And it's just like, so let's say, for example, Sally Mae. Let's go back to Sally Mae. And so I have a watch that's worth $100, and I tell Sally Mae, I say, you know what, let me pay off this. I'm going to sell this watch and pay it, you know, pay her her $100, and then we'll call it a day. All right, well, I go and I find out my watch has decreased in value. My watch is only worth $50 now. Well, it's going to take more watches to pay off my debt to Sally Mae. So that's the same thing there. If we print more money, the value goes down, and it's going to take more dollars to pay off our debt. That's how the economy works. So that's why we can't just print more money. Otherwise, believe you me, a lot of people, I'm sure a lot of people have thought about that. Okay, so that's where we're ending for today. So let's see, we're going to do that. All right, so that's where we're ending for today. This was a long lecture, like I said. I could apologize for that, but hey, you have the ability to pause and restart. So you can, in fact, you have more of that ability than I do. So if, you know, so I'm not going to feel too sorry for you about that one. You have more of that ability than the people in class, than your in-class associates. So we're not going to feel too sorry for you about that. But in the meanwhile, this is all that will be covered on your exam. Will stop here. It'll go through national debt. After that, when we come back, it's going to be, we do money and banking, and then we will do international. Let me make sure of that. Yeah, and then you'll be done with the class. So money and banking may take, I may split that up in a couple of lectures, and then international we will probably cover in one. So you don't have much left. So if you go a week without hearing a lecture from me, don't panic or freak out or wonder. Just know that I will get everything done to you before that time. All right then. So have a very good day, evening, whenever you're listening to this, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.